Welcome back to Switchtop. These games are the ones where story and mechanics both land clean, no compromises. We're counting down from 20 to 1, ending with the game I think Switch will be remembered for most. Let's get into it. Persona 5 Royal takes the original 2016 game and folds in a full third semester, a new palace, and two new characters, Kasumi and her true identity, Sumire. Plus, the counselor Maruki, who reshapes the back half of the story into something darker than the base game ever went. The core loop stays the same. Live a double life as a Tokyo high schooler by day and a phantom thief by night, building confidant relationships that feed directly into your Persona fusion and combat options. Battles run on elemental weaknesses, the one more chain system, and all-out attacks, dressed up in some of the sharpest UI design in any RPG. Royal also smooths out the original's slow opening hours and gives the ending actual room to breathe. It's long, over 100 hours if you're thorough, but the pacing holds up because the writing earns the runtime instead of padding it. Celeste is a precision platformer about climbing a mountain, and underneath that simple pitch is one of the tightest movement systems in the genre. A dash, a jump, and a wall climb. Nothing more. But the level design squeezes an enormous amount out of those three tools. Madeline's story runs parallel to the difficulty curve, dealing with anxiety and self-doubt through a literal split of her character into two. And the game never treats that theme as decoration. It's built into how the mechanics escalate. Deaths are instant, and respawns are just as fast. So the game trains you to treat failure as information rather than punishment. Chapter 9, Farewell, added later, pushes the movement tech to its absolute limit for anyone who wants more after the main campaign. Strawberries and B-sides exist for players chasing mastery, but the core 8 chapters alone are a complete, well-paced statement on their own. Astral Chain is Platinum Games handling a cop noir premise where you play a rookie in a special police unit that fights interdimensional creatures using a bound legion tethered to you by a chain. The combat is the whole pitch. You're controlling your character and your legion at once, using the chain to trap enemies, set up combos, and switch between 5 legion types with different tools, like a sword for close range or an arrow legion for ranged pressure. It takes real time to click, but once it does, fights become a layered puzzle of positioning and timing rather than button mashing. Outside combat, there's investigation work, side cases, and a precinct full of characters that flesh out the city between missions. The story leans into themes of sacrifice and duty without over-explaining itself, and the whole game commits to its aesthetic, from UI to soundtrack, in a way that feels genuinely distinct from anything else Platinum has made. Animal Crossing New Horizons moved the series onto a deserted island you build up from scratch, and that shift changed the tone of the whole game. Less about slotting into an existing town, more about shaping one yourself. Terraforming lets you reroute rivers, carve cliffs, and lay paths, which turn the game into as much a design tool as a life sim. The daily loop of fishing, bug catching, fossil hunting, and nooks cranny runs are still there, but crafting and DIY recipes added a resource layer that wasn't in earlier entries. Updates over its lifespan brought in Brewster's Cafe, group stretching, and more furniture and events, extending a game that already had no real end state. There's no story pushing you forward, which is either the appeal or the drawback depending on what you want. But as a low-pressure, long-term game to dip into, few things on Switch match how much control it gives you over the space you're playing in. Dragon Quest XI's is the definitive version of the mainline entry, adding 2D mode that lets you switch the entire game into a retro overhead style at will, along with orchestral music options and extra story content not in the original release. It's a classic hero's journey on paper, a chosen one gathering a party to stop a great evil, but the writing plays it with more sincerity and craft than the premise suggests, and the cast carries real weight by the mid-game twist that reframes the whole plot. Combat is turn-based, with a straightforward but deep skill and equipment system, and the pacing rarely drags despite a long runtime. The world design leans traditional, big overworld, distinct regions, no open world sprawl, But that traditional structure is exactly why the game reads as confident rather than dated. It's one of the clearest arguments that turn-based JRPGs don't need reinvention to still hit hard.
Fight and fight some more! Go on! Phew.
Unicorn Overlord is a tactics game built around unit formations instead of single characters. You assemble squads of up to 5 units each with their own positioning, gear, and class synergies, then send them to clash with enemy squads across a real-time overworld map. Battles resolve mostly automatically once positioned, so the actual skill test is in squad composition and pre-fight preparation, rather than turn-by-turn micromanagement, which is a real departure from most tactics games and takes some adjustment. The story follows a prince reclaiming a fractured continent from an empire, liberating towns as you go, which ties the strategic layer directly into the map's growth. Character recruitment is deep, dozens of units with distinct classes and rune-based skills to combine. Once the formation logic clicks, the depth in customizing squads rivals anything more traditional tactics games offer.
You'll see no harm!
Metroid Prime Remastered rebuilds the 2002 original with modern visuals and, more importantly, modern dual-stick aiming as an option alongside the classic control scheme, which changes how the combat and scanning feel without touching the level design underneath. That level design is still the reason the game holds up. Talon 4 is a dense, interconnected planet where every new item, the morph ball, missiles, later suit upgrades, opens up paths you'd already walked past, turning backtracking into discovery instead of a chore. The isolation is doing a lot of narrative work here too. There's barely any dialogue. Most of the story comes from scanning logs and environmental detail, and that restraint gives the atmosphere room to do the storytelling. First-person exploration married to Metroid's traditional structure was a gamble in 2002, and the remaster makes clear how well it actually worked, holding up against any exploration game made since. Hades 2 keeps the roguelike structure that made the first game work. Run-based combat, permanent meta progression between deaths, boon builds from different gods, but shifts protagonists to Melinoe, sister to Zagreus, fighting through the underworld and beyond it to take down Kronos. The weapon variety is wider this time, with more distinct playstyles baked into each one, and the boon system adds arcana cards that let you shape your build even before a run starts. Combat feels a notch faster and more aggressive than the original, and the new areas, Oceanus, the Fields of Morning, push the visual and environmental variety further than the first game's underworld-only setting did. Story-wise, it leans into found family and generational conflict the same way the first game did, and characters carry over enough familiarity that returning players get new context on people they already know, without needing to have played the first to follow it. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom takes the same Hyrule from Breath of the Wild and rebuilds what you can do in it, mainly through Ultra Hand, which lets you fuse objects together to build vehicles, weapons, and contraptions on the fly, and Ascend, which lets Link rise straight through solid ceilings. Those two abilities alone open up puzzle and combat solutions that didn't exist in the previous game, and the Sky Islands plus the underground depths add 2 entire new layers to explore on top of the returning surface map. Weapon fusion replaces simple durability frustration with a system where breaking a weapon just means it's time to fuse a new one, which changes how you approach combat encounters. The story digs into Hyrule's deep past through Zelda's own arc, giving her more direct narrative weight than she's had in a mainline entry in a long time. Hades set the template its sequel is now following. Run-based roguelike combat, where Zagreus fights up through the underworld toward the surface, dying constantly, and every death feeding directly back into story progression and permanent upgrades, instead of resetting you to 0 narratively. Combat is fast, precise, and built around distinct weapons that each change how a run plays, layered with boons from the Olympian gods that combine into genuinely different builds run to run. What made it stand out on release was how the narrative structure solved the roguelike's usual repetition problem. Characters remember your deaths, react to your relationships, and the story actually moves forward the more you fail, which turned a mechanical weakness of the genre into its narrative strength. A Short Hike is a small, low-stakes game about climbing a mountain to get cell signal. And that's basically the entire pitch. But the way it's built makes that walk genuinely worth taking slowly. Movement is loose and satisfying almost immediately. Gliding and climbing feel good enough that traversal itself becomes the main activity rather than a means to an end. The island is compact, but packed with optional characters, side quests, fishing, and collectibles that reward wandering off the direct path to the summit. There's no combat, no fail state pressure, and the whole runtime sits at a couple of hours, which is part of the point. It doesn't overstay its welcome or pad itself out. The tone is warm without being saccharine, and the writing has a light, dry sense of humor running through every NPC conversation. It's proof a game doesn't need scale to be complete, just a clear idea executed with care. Kirby and the Forgotten Land moves the series into full 3D platforming for the first time, dropping Kirby into an abandoned, overgrown human world instead of Dreamland, which gives the environments a distinct post-apocalyptic charm the series hadn't touched before. The copyability system is still core, but Mouthful mode is the real addition, letting Kirby swallow objects like cars or vending machines to gain entirely new movement and attack options tied to that object. Levels are compact 3D spaces rather than open-world sprawl, each built around a specific gimmick or copy ability showcase, which keeps the pacing tight across the whole campaign. Waddle Dee rescue collectibles tie into building up a hub town, giving light progression outside the main levels. It's a difficulty-friendly game by design, but the boss fights and post-game content have real teeth for players who want it, and the 3D shift never loses what made 2D Kirby games work. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate whole premise is in the name. Every fighter from every prior Smash game returns, alongside new additions and a steady stream of DLC characters, making it the largest crossover roster in the series and arguably in games generally. The core platform fighter mechanics are as sharp as they've ever been. Fast, momentum-based combat with percentage-based knockback instead of health bars, and the character variety means matchups genuinely change how you have to play. World of Light gives single-player a narrative wrapper with hundreds of spirit battles, but the game's real depth is in versus play, both locally and online, where the roster and stage variety keep matches from getting stale even years in. Balance patches and new fighters kept the game evolving well past launch, which is rare for a game this size. Dead Cells is a Roguevania, permadeath roguelike structure layered onto Metroidvania-style interconnected levels, where you fight through procedurally arranged biomes, with permanent upgrades carrying between runs, even as gear resets on death. Combat is fast and weapon-focused, with a huge pool of weapons and skills that force you to adapt your build to whatever the run gives you, rather than settling into one fixed playstyle. The movement is tight enough that platforming and combat blend into the same skill. Dodging, rolling, and repositioning matter as much as damage output. Biomes unlock new paths as you find blueprints and currency, giving the roguelike structure actual forward momentum instead of just repetition. Years of free updates added entire new areas, bosses, and a full ending arc, which is unusual generosity for a game already this replayable at launch. Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door remake rebuilds the 2004 GameCube original with modern visuals while keeping its turn-based combat system intact. Timed button presses on both attack and defense that reward paying attention rather than letting the RPG combat run passively. The story follows Mario chasing a treasure map across Roadport and beyond, and it's carried by writing that's sharper and funnier than most Mario spin-offs get credit for, with partner characters like Goombella and Vivian each getting real personality and their own combat utility. Badges let you customize Mario's abilities between fights, adding a build layer on top of the straightforward turn structure. The remake doesn't rework the core game. It modernizes presentation and quality of life, while trusting the original design, which was already considered one of the best in the series. Super Mario Bros. Wonder is the first fully new 2D Mario in over a decade, and it uses that freedom to throw out the visual and mechanical conservatism the new Super Mario Bros. Era had settled into. Wonder Flowers are the core gimmick, dropped into nearly every level to trigger a sudden, unpredictable transformation of the stage itself. Pipes come alive, Mario turns into a Goomba, gravity flips, and no two Wonder effects play the same way. Badges add optional modifiers you equip before a level, changing traversal options like a parachute cap or grappling vine, which gives replay value beyond just collectibles. The level design leans into that unpredictability throughout, rarely settling into a formula for more than a stage or two. Visually, it drops the plastic look of the new series entirely for something more expressive and character-driven. Fire Emblem Three Houses fuses Fire Emblem's tactics combat with a school sim structure. You're a professor at Garreg Mach Monastery, choosing one of three houses to teach. And that choice branches the entire story, cast, and eventual conflict you fight through. Monthly exploration phases let you build relationships, teach skills, and prep your students before tactical battles that use the series' weapon triangle and permadeath systems, though permadeath can be toggled for players who want the story without losing characters for good. The time skip partway through recontextualizes the entire cast and turns former students into wartime commanders, and playing multiple routes reveals how differently the same conflict reads depending on which house's perspective you followed. 4 distinct routes give it replay value most tactics games don't attempt.
From the enemy. Take up position inside the forest.
Xenoblade Chronicles 3 merges the timelines and cast of the first 2 games into a story about Noah and Mio, soldiers from opposing nations forced into a fixed lifespan by the world of Ionios, fighting to break that cycle. Combat builds on the series' MMO-inspired real-time system. 6 party members swapping between classes learned from heroes recruited across the story, with chain attacks letting you link party actions into massive, coordinated damage windows. The open world is dense with side quests that actually tie into the main themes, rather than functioning as pure filler. And the hero recruitment system means your party composition genuinely shifts as the story progresses. It's a long game, story and side content both, but the pacing holds because the character writing carries scenes that would otherwise be pure exposition. As a culmination of the series' world building to that point, it closes threads from both prior games while standing on its own. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild rebuilt what an open-world Zelda could be by stripping away the series' usual linear dungeon structure and handing you the entire map from the start, with physics and chemistry systems, fire spreads, metal conducts lightning, wind moves objects that interact consistently enough to create real emergent solutions to problems. Shrines replace traditional dungeons as smaller, self-contained puzzle spaces, while the 4 divine beasts serve as the closest thing to classic dungeons, tied into a story about Link recovering his memory and identity after a 100-year sleep. Weapon durability forces constant adaptation rather than attachment to one loadout, which was controversial at launch but reinforces the game's core idea. Use what's around you, don't rely on a fixed toolkit. Climbing and gliding turn traversal itself into a genuine design layer instead of just movement between content. Super Mario Odyssey's core idea, Cappy letting Mario possess enemies and objects, sounds simple, but it's the reason the game has this much mechanical range packed into a single 3D platformer. Each kingdom is built around a handful of possession types, specific to that area, and the level design constantly reintroduces familiar tools in new combinations, rather than leaning on one core moveset for the whole game. Moon Collection is deliberately generous, thousands of moons scattered across kingdoms, which keeps momentum high and rarely forces backtracking through content that's already been solved. The kingdoms themselves range wildly in tone, from the realistic proportions of New Dog City to smaller stylized areas, and that variety keeps the pacing from ever settling into repetition. Post-game content, Darker Side and the Kingdom expansions, pushes the platforming difficulty further for players who want it. That's the list. If you've played all of these already, you know why they're here. Drop your own picks in the comments if I missed something you'd put on this list. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.